Hello, bonjour, bienvenue, and as we say in my country, Céad Míle Fáilte. We have a wonderful panel, quite a meaty topic as well. So let me first ask our panel to join us. So Marco Giorello, Head of Unit at the European Commission, Director-General for Communications, Networks, Content and Technology, Platforms, Policy and Enforcement, and Patrick Waelbroeck, Professor of Economics at the Telecom Paris Institut, Polytechnique de Paris. Thomas Lytzen, Director of Ad Sales and Tech at Ekstra Bladet, a leading Danish publisher, and Rhys Nölke, my fellow colleague on the IB Europe board, also Senior Vice President of Technology and Data at Bertelsmann, a major German publisher. Please give them a warm welcome and come and join me. And as our panel take their seats, as Jennifer introduced me, for those of you who don't know me, I am the CEO of IB Ireland, set up IB Ireland in 2010, a long time ago, and as a director of IB Europe since 2015. And in terms of just providing a little bit of context before we kick off on our theme today, which is the digitisation gap and how we bridge it, I wanted to just share a little of why I am still with IAB after all these years. And I think for many reasons, you know, that's why we're here today. And I passionately believe that the real potential of digital advertising and the most positive impact for Europe, for the whole of the business community, but also for consumers, lies in an organization like IAB, which represents the whole industry. We're quite unique, and again, some of you may not be so familiar. IAB represents from platforms to publishers to media agencies, to service providers in our busy supply chain of digital advertising. And indeed, many IABs, including IAB Ireland and others, also represent advertisers. So it's a unique organization, and collaboration is at the center of what we do. And indeed, today is about collaborating with policymakers like Marco, and indeed with the broader community in terms of consumers and society. And that's really where we will bridge this digitization gap. Now, we have many questions, important themes. We're going to look at, you know, indeed the challenges that our industry faces first in the first section of our panel. Then we're going to look at the solutions that we hope that we can all bring together. So I'm going to jump right in, Rhys, and actually start with you and say, how does the digitization gap impact on publishing industry?
Well, I think for, you know, just as an example, and being here at IAB Europe, you know, we are trying to sort of, you know, close the ranks from different businesses. Similarly, maybe as you may know, Bertelsmann has got a kind of a vast portfolio of different companies in there. I think we do a 20 billion kind of annual revenue, and more than half comes from content businesses like RTL and BMG Music and Penguin Random House Books. So, you know, the investment only alone into content, for instance, with 2 billion at RTL level, you know, is already huge. But the refinancing is becoming increasingly difficult, and I think we saw Daniel's chart in there, and you know, it's a kind of a flattish line on traditional advertising revenue and income that needs to finance vast amounts of this creative content across the board. And you know, I am not in the complaining business, you know. I think it's actually something of a reality gap that we need to describe, and where we need to find ways to make it actually work for everyone in the industry. And this is, you know, I'm not happy to sort of, you know, see a TikTok promotion as such, you know, on stage here, but it is part of the digital industry. It's part of the reality on how advertising works. And I think we as industry needs to face up this. And that's why I'm really happy that this event is happening, because we actually close the ranks with TikTok, with colleagues from Google, from Meta. That, you know, if we're honest, you know, they are competitors in the market, but we are all working with the same kind of regulatory framework. And I can say that, even media itself is, over decades has had to meet regulatory, let's say, demand specifics overall. So the digitization gap itself is all about how do we make data work? How do we actually make AI work in future? I spend a lot of time in my job now, in the United States, looking at how AI will actually change media businesses. And ultimately, they are just looking at us and saying, what are you doing in Europe? How are we going to circumvent this? And here I just see a huge need for debate on how to make it work in practice. We've got great intentions in Europe, but I think we've really not made it work in reality.
Great starter, and actually leads beautifully into our next question, Thomas, because having looked at the challenges that are facing industries like publishing, what would you identify as the pressing policy and regulatory challenges hindering the development in Europe?
I think there are 3 areas that we need to look at. The first being the lack of interplay between legislation. The second being the level of complexity, and the third, we could call it, and no offense, but arbitrary enforcement of the current legislation and rules across Europe. Just let me give you some examples. In Denmark, we have 2 government agencies openly arguing about how to interpret the interplay between privacy and GDPR, to the detriment of publishers. We would like to count our visitors visiting our digital properties, the digitization agencies. Yes, you can do that. The data protection agencies say, no, then you'll be collecting data illegally and we will find ways of punishing you. So that's a draw. Level of complexity when we do deals, tech deals with suppliers, SSPs that through which we rely on to sell our digital ad space to the market. It takes us between 1 and 3 months to do data agreements, to do a JCA or whatever is needed, because we always struggle on the interpretation part. How do a UK-based or an American-based or German-based supplier see legal bases, purposes, and so on? So it's always a struggle, and no one ever really gets it kind of right. And then the third, looking at the enforcement part, it took 5 years for DPAs across Europe to start regulating Meta and Facebook. 5 years. And during that time, we as publishers were heavily regulated by the local DPAs, and that is what they have to do. So it's not a complaint about that, but we have not been playing on a level playing field with big tech. And I just recently saw a video clip with Vivian Redding talking about the GDPR, and she said, this was not what I wanted. I didn't want the local football club to be subject of their national DPA. I wanted big tech to be fenced in and regulated.
Yeah, very valid, and local hairdressers and beauty salons and all of that. So Patrick, looking from your perspective, what practical steps would you recommend Europe taking to reduce the barriers while respecting national sovereignty?
Okay. All my answers to your questions will in fact be related. So let me start with this first theme, which is privacy and competition. We tend to think about privacy and competition laws as 2 separate laws with no interaction. We know, I will try now to argue that this is not the case. So I'm going to talk about two snowballing effects. The first snowball is the fact that data gives competitive advantage. Data allows you to better target your consumers, better identify your consumer segments. And the problem is that this comes on top of network effects, increasing returns, and this is the first snowball. If you just let this snowball roll, it's going to become big and bigger and bigger. On top of that, you have another snowball, which is AI, because the way AI works today is by collecting a lot of data. I'm not talking about 1,000 data points. We are talking about billions and billions and billions and billions of data. And I can write a program in my office room, something brilliant, really top-notch. It is worth nothing. It is worth nothing because the way these algorithms are designed is such that the person who has the more data just has a better algorithm. It is called machine learning. They learn from the examples, they learn from real-world data. That's the second snowball, which means that someone who has access to a lot of data will have a better algorithm. Now you combine these two giant snowballs, and they will merge into an even bigger snowball, right? And this will lead to, and it in fact has already led to market concentration, and it will lead to even more market concentration. So what can we do about that? A lot of people come to me and they complain about GDPR. But there is no other way to look at it. We could also look at GDPR as a tool to restore competition. Let me explain. If data gives a huge competitive advantage, we have to make sure that these data have been lawfully collected, that indeed the different laws have been respected. I'm not sure that this is the case right now, but as you can see, this argument just is about protecting data in order to also protect competition.
Yep. And what incentives, Marco, can EU policymakers introduce to enable industries to better leverage the data, as Patrick was speaking about, and all that competitive advantage, and create value online?
Yes, thanks a lot. I understand that you have other commission, colleagues later on in the day, so I may give it a first try, and then I'm sure that you will have other discussions in the afternoon. The perspective that I want to bring today is the perspective of platforms regulations, which is the area where I am working on, as you know, and in particular, DigiConnect is responsible for the enforcement of the Digital Market Act and Digital Services Act. Now, a message that I think is important, to come across with is that regulation can also create opportunities. So I hope that this legal framework that we have recently introduced is not seen only as a burden, but also as a source for opportunities. And I think this is an important message that I would like to come across. Highlighting this element, I would say at two levels. One is the level of fairness in the European online space. As you know, the Digital Services Act has a lot of rules which aim at bringing more fairness, in particular, but not only, through specific rules which are addressed to the big players, to the very large online platforms and services. And we believe that overall, bringing more fairness in the system, improving the way money is channeled, including through advertisement, basically in the internet ecosystem, is something which in the end should benefit everybody and benefit in particular, the good actors in the market as opposed to the bad actors. And then there is another level, actually, which is maybe more specific when I talk about creating new opportunities, which is tackled by the Digital Market Act in particular. And, Professor Waelbroeck was mentioning, fostering a competition, and the DMA, which is a specific regulation addressed to the big gatekeepers, is in particular, trying to create new business opportunities and open up the markets in the relationship between what we call gatekeepers and the business users. And I think, again, advertising and advertising revenues are a very important example of how the DMA can help, because there are a number of provisions which are specifically aimed at increasing transparency, opening up the data lakes, and bringing more fairness in the relationship between big tech and advertisers and publishers and all the other players in the ecosystem. So my first message today would be to look at the legal framework also for the opportunities that it can bring.
Okay. Patrick, do you have some other thoughts in terms of that questions and the incentives that policymakers may
yes,
provide?
yes, thank you. I would like to talk about data sovereignty. It's something I'm working on. There is this battle, this AI battle between the US and China. I'm sorry to announce that, but I don't think that Europe looks too good in this battle. It doesn't mean that we have lost the digitization war, because as I mentioned before, what really matters is not the code. The code is important. You need data scientists who can write decent code, but it's open source, so people can copy it. So I'm not too worried about it. So the real input that matters is data. And nowadays, all companies from all over the world just harvest our data from European citizens. And if we can get back control on this data through data sovereignty, we have to figure out what it means. But if we can develop this concept and now make sure that European companies are the first to be able to leverage on the data of their own citizens, then it can change the rules of the game. So how can you reach this situation? We need technical tools. And I'm not an engineer, I don't have solutions, but I know that there are solutions based on blockchain. We have the digital wallet coming, enabled by the ADAS 2 regulation, and perhaps there are tools that we can develop to get back our sovereignty.
Rhys, what would be the financial and operational implications for further restrictions on personalized advertising for media? And, you know, again, I thought in Daniel Knapp's presentation earlier, there was such a powerful slide illustrating the significance of personalized advertising. 70% of consumers expect to receive personalized advertising. 71% of all businesses are fueled by digital advertising in Europe. And, you know, so I think that is a really relevant question for publishers and for SMEs as well as all businesses.
Maybe one has to take a little bit of a step back. I think what Patrick was illustrating, I can only subscribe that, you know, in its core idea, GDPR was giving a framework to actually sort of clarify the way how personal data can be used. And in reality, the situation just looks in our industry, in the media industry, but other industry very similar, that big companies in Europe are not able to process that data in an adequate way because it's basically set in different entities. It's not a kind of a big Inc. Company like in US companies sitting there encompassing it all. It's very much split up, and we are not able to link up the data. I think this is one mistake that was made, that big groups in itself cannot actually know their own customer that they own in different entities and link up these traits. In other jurisdictions, this is basically a no-brainer, and that's where we need to actually sort of make personal advertising work in future, because it's not only about the advertising. There are many more business models that are coming in. Look at subscription models, for instance, where now advertising is coming into play. The Amazons and the Netflixes are sort of reversing it, coming from consumer insights that they are now monetizing in form from advertising, and that's competition, and that's what we need to bear up to. But in actual fact, it's very hard. We are basically siloed, and we need to see means to actually be able to do more with our own data in Europe. And looking even in the automotive industry, etc., a BMW or whatever, they don't even also know their own consumer and customer, because it's all siloed and scattered across. And they are in a similar fashion trying to sort of link up consumer insights. And this is a situation where we're really making our lives very hard for the wrong reasons, I believe. I believe that the consumer should have the choice, and in reality, the consumer is doing a lot more with their data than we actually would like them to do. So there are certain things you want to sort of make sure that they don't go wrong. But in the business side, we've already heard the examples. You know, DPAs and other agreements take far too long to actually manage. Interpretations are far too vast and scattered again in various institutions and areas. So that's where we need to, I feel, clean up.
And then, though, specifically in relation to, I guess, that aspect of personalized advertising, and maybe, Thomas, you might speak of that, because I'm interested in that perspective of the importance of personalized advertising for publishers and, I guess, SMEs, as well as the whole of the rest of the industry. But I think there is a significance there in terms of your particular industry.
Yeah, and I think, obviously personalized advertising is hugely important to publishers, but I think we should actually take a step back and try to kind of define what is personalized advertising, because it's not knowing everything about your users. We actually don't want that. We don't want to know about their political stances or personal life or anything. But one thing which is counted as personalized information is a simple cookie ID that we use to frequency cap to make sure that you don't see the same ad over and over and over again, because users don't want that. Advertisers certainly don't want to pay for exposing their message to the same user 50 times. But that small piece of information, not used for anything else, is regarded personal information. And therefore, relying on a cookie as well, it requires a hardcore consent. And users, if they don't give that, you cannot cap your frequency. A very simple thing. It is not knowing anything about the user. It is just kind of a hygiene factor, part of the toolbox that is needed in order to do digital advertising. From my point of view, this should never have been regulated as personal data. We should look at behavior instead, looking at, do we want profiling across the web? We can discuss that. That's probably not a good idea. As publishers, we've actually taken quite a hard stance on that, and some of my IAB fellows, I guess, in some calls have been very tired of me arguing that this should actually be banned, a hardcore ban. So regulate behavior instead. When I go to my local hardware store to buy an axe, I don't have to fill out a form saying, no, I won't kill my girlfriend with it. We do that with cookies. We regulate tech, not the behavior. What the cookie does, the bad things a cookie can do. We should have done that instead.
And indeed, I think these examples are very useful because they are real indicators of the challenge for regulators who have an intention and then unintended consequences, perhaps because those conversations haven't happened. And hopefully, from today on, we can build on this communication to say, we can see your objective, but this is how we would suggest is the best way forward. And then that leads me beautifully into the next question, Marco. How should the EU balance the economic benefits of personalized advertising with citizens' privacy concerns?
Yes, I mean, we are aware that it is really the debate at the moment, and again, the Digital Services Act addresses the matter in a certain way, and I will say something in a moment. But of course, it's not the only piece of the puzzle. But maybe let me just explain, a couple of things about how specifically, the DSA gets into this matter. The DSA is obviously a horizontal regulation. It's not specifically about advertisement, but there are a number of provisions, as I mentioned before, aimed, broadly speaking, at bringing more fairness, choice, and safety for the users. There are two provisions, actually, which are quite relevant for this debate, which, broadly speaking, requires online platforms and online intermediaries to be transparent towards the final users as regards the parameters that they use basically to target them, which is very important because it's information, but it is the first step, and also allows the users to, at certain conditions, change basically these parameters. So decided basically, not to be specifically targeted. And then there are specific provisions, but there are related to the provision to target minors based on their personal data, as well as anybody else on very sensitive data as defined in the GDPR about political preferences, sexual orientation, and similar things. Now, I think that talking about the balance, here you see an attempt basically by the horizontal legislation that we have in Europe, even if it is from this specific perspective of online platforms, to start by empowering basically the users rather than starting from outright prohibitions which are limited to specific categories. So I think that this is an interesting element to look at. And then getting back a moment to the concept of opportunity that I was discussing before, I think what would be interesting to observe, and I think maybe also other panelists have already some insight about that, is how this regulatory framework may lead to the creation of different business models, basically. So again, it's not about dropping a completely personalized advertising, but the question that we have is giving more choice to users. Is it also going to trigger basically new opportunities for the industry, new business models, different type of advertising? And here is where I think we are particularly interested to see what the industry think about.
Patrick, that challenge of balancing those interests which shouldn't be competing, the importance of personalized advertising and indeed citizens' privacy concerns. From your perspective, what would you suggest?
Well, I would like to first start with the business model. Currently, large companies, they use what I call the harvest model. They just take all the data they can, and they provide service. And the way they engage with the customers is by giving them targeted and ads and targeted content, and that's why people come back use the service. There is another way to reach the same outcome is by providing a trusting environment. I want to talk about trust because I don't trust anybody anymore on the internet. I've turned into a David Duchovny. I trust no one. It shouldn't be like that, because if everybody acts like me, they're gonna install a VPN, an ad blocker, they're gonna use fake identities, and the whole ecosystem will just self-destruct. So if we don't want to witness this scenario, it's really important to add trust into the equation. And there is this debate about consent or pay. This discussion is pointless if you don't trust the company. If I don't trust the company, there is no way I'm going to pay for the service, regardless of whether it's the right price.
Rhys, that's an interesting perspective, isn't it, that Patrick just shared, and I'm sure publishers have a view on that as well.
Yeah, well, the opportunity to give consumers a choice is more than welcome, whether you want to pay or whether you want to have an ad load that is less and more distinct towards your preferences. I mean, that's where we need to give consumers more control across the industry. This is something that I think we've been working on, in various iterations, whether it's with a consumer-led kind of approach with the European Net ID Foundation that you may know, and we'll hear later actually a little bit more about these kind of initiatives in Europe that I think, are starting at the forefront. But what always happens is, you start with these ideas that actually are on a good way, and then the interpretation and the actual wrangling starts on whose interests are here at play, and specifically then also scrutinizing this with some interpretations of regulation on top of that. And I think that's where we are kind of, trying to sort of, at least for the digital advertising space here at IAB Europe, trying to figure out solutions. For instance, with the transparency consent framework, that has really sort of been a reaction right at the beginning of GDPR. But that, again, is something that is being sort of, discussed and debated. So publishers themselves, are open to actually give those choices. There are means to actually also monetize these choices in adequate ways. But when you look at the actual landscape on offerings, the investment also in multiple platforms that you see, whether it's now the connected TV environment, very much important for us, or any other kind of monetization on other platforms, that's where the fragmented landscapes becomes a huge challenge, because it's not one-to-many anymore in terms of a broadcast, as also Daniel showed that. It is very much, a singular way on channeling the distribution, and that is becoming even more, let's say, wild when it actually then comes to the use of data in this play. And I think that's where we simply don't have a reality, let's say, the reality is not matching the framework that we all think, should be the basis, but interpretation simply goes wild.
Marco, you referenced earlier, the importance of competitiveness and innovation, and in many ways in this challenging global landscape that we're in at the moment, it's, for Europe, this is more important than ever. And again, a similar question to the earlier, how do we balance that in terms of our industry as well as the protection of citizens' privacy rights?
Yes, this is obviously a big question, and I think the application of the law is probably only part of the puzzle. But maybe what I want to say in these respects is that from our side, there is one level of engagement which is and will keep being the application of the law, indeed the enforcement, but this is not done in isolation, in the sense that the enforcement, and I would say, here maybe if we take the Digital Market Act as an example, is particularly relevant in the sense that a good compliance by gatekeepers also depend on having, for the Commission, the right information coming from the beneficiaries of the legislation. So what I mean here is that, you have in the Digital Market Act a number of rules that, as I mentioned before, are aimed at creating new opportunities, opening up the market, and it is very important for the Commission, to get feedback from the beneficiaries, so in this case from the publishers and the advertisers, as concretely as possible on their reaction, basically, to the level of compliance of the gatekeeper. So this, I think, is an important thing that I wanted to mention. And then I wanted to take the opportunity to say that in our broader activity of listening to stakeholders, and today is for me an important opportunity to do so, we are also launching a series of roundtables on online advertising from the perspective of the Digital Services Act in particular, with the goal of discussing potential voluntary initiatives that may emerge in the future in the form of codes of conduct. So this is something which is going to be developed, between mid-February, March, and then we will see where these discussions will lead us. We have already invited a number of stakeholders, and I think many of you are aware of that, to a kick-off meeting on the 11th of February. And for us, this is, again, an important piece of the puzzle, given the complexity of this ecosystem, its fundamental importance, both from an economic but also societal perspective, to keep really listening to everybody and advance together in parallel to the enforcement of the law, which of course remains our priority.
And I think that we would speak on behalf of the whole industry to say we really welcome those roundtables, and that is a fantastic opportunity to share that with consumer society groups and indeed to collaborate with the regulators and policymakers. So thank you for that, and I'm sure our members will be actively involved in those roundtables. Turning then to EU and national data protection area, and question for you, Thomas. Are regulators, from your point of view, adequately considering the economic benefits of personalized advertising in their decisions?
It seems I get all the boring questions on privacy and DPAs, but it's a tricky question, and I think perhaps also a bit leading, because I think it would be extremely unfair to say that the EU and the national organizations are not doing that. I truly believe that they want to create wealth in Europe, but in some cases they are the result of the legislation being through all sorts of negotiations, lobbyist influenced, various interests in the European Parliament, national interests. You end up with this mixed up and partly not working legislation, and that is what is hurting us, because I truly believe that across the board, national governments, the Commission, the Parliament, everyone wants for Europe to succeed. And I think we should be much better at actually discussing that, because you have, the Danish DPA has one purpose, and that is to take care of users' interests or data subjects' interests. They are not there to take care of businesses. It's not their purpose. So obviously they focus on users and not businesses. And that's not in any way me blaming them, because that's just what they do and what they have to do. But we also need other government authorities and agencies to start rereading the Rome Treaty again, because that was built on businesses creating wealth in Europe. And if we don't do that, then we will lag behind, as we've seen in the figures with the US. They're doing their way by deregulating everything. I certainly don't believe that's the way forward. But we should find a new way in Europe, and I don't know if it's a third, fourth, or fifth way, but a new way where we start looking at competitiveness as one of the prime goals.
Absolutely, I think that's a rallying cry from today, and I think also to be assured that we're all there to assist with that. It is incredibly challenging. We understand that for regulators and policymakers specifically, because it is a complicated industry, but we can do a better job. And I guess we would have a view across IABs as well, that, the fragmentation of regulation has created problems, and indeed the challenges in terms of compliance, particularly for smaller companies and for sectors, unintended. But I guess what we would like to see going forward, all of us, and I know this would be the view of regulators as well, and indeed regulators in my own country, is that we would do a better job, that the regulation actually does achieve its purposes, recognizing the complexities in our industry. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to use all the time. So I guess I'm going to come with a final, very simple question to everybody. What's the one thing you would like to leave this audience with on foot of our conversation about the digitization gap? And if I start quickly with you, Patrick.
Well, I think data is, what we should really focus on, understand where it comes from, how it is used, and what is its effect on the competitiveness of market.
Fantastic. And I'm going to move straight over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, I would just say we need to talk more to each other. across the board, publishers or businesses. I'm just representing one business now, but publishers should talk to lawmakers, to regulators, in order to find this sweet spot where we in Europe can actually move ahead.
Marco?
I go back from where I started. Look at the regulatory framework as an opportunity and communicate with the regulators and tell us your ideas in this respect.
Fantastic. Rhys?
Well, you know, one striking data point we had this morning was that $1 of advertising potentially creating 1 euro creating 19 euros of economic impact in there. It just reminds me that we digital advertising is a fueling motor and an engine to drive digital growth, and specifically also preserving the media pluralism that we have across Europe, whether it's from Ekstra or from RTL or news online outlets across Europe. And I would hope that this event here gives us the opportunity to discuss the actual opportunities going forward, to declutter and also review a few things, and then sort of making digital great as such in Europe. And I think we need to embrace that thought, because that kind of thinking does fuel and spark, motivation for innovation. And we need to get out of this duck and cover mentality that we are having and stand up for what our values go for. And I think, we can be proud of that, what we have in Europe, but we need to obviously also accelerate this.
We need to roll up our sleeves and ensure we all work together. Thank you all for your really valuable contributions. It's been a great discussion, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.